to forego rigorous scientific examination of what the government has done already in the past, that we should just simply trust them. Now, of course, they're part of the government. They're part of the costly coalition. Doesn't matter how much I like them. They're still a part of it. And if you want to be in French, a béni oui oui, and just suggest that everything is good and shake your head yes, then you can continue to do that. That is the prerogative, of course, of members of Parliament. But when we know that, if there's no nefarious purpose, then why would this particular paragraph outline under the principles that suggests the ministers to consider the following principles? And this is what they can do. This is the power that the minister specifically has asked to be outlined in this bill. And yeah, of course, we have a system that's not perfect. I understand that. Do mistakes happen? Yes, I already admitted that. They happen. There are by times that the things are not appropriate. However, that being said, having a government agency to interfere with the self-governing autonomy of, for instance, physicians in this country, I would suggest to you to say, who would want to practice medicine here? To think that, don't worry, you can trust the government. What's the Ronald Reagan saying? The most hated 9 words in history. Don't worry, I'm here from the government. I'm here to help. I just don't buy that. And people who really want their freedom and their ability to practice in the manner in which they have been trained, in which they continue to have their continuing medical education updated on a regular basis, for them to have that curtailed, perhaps. Again, and this isn't, I'm sure Mr. Julian's down there saying, oh, this is a tinfoil hat idea. Of course, why would the government want to do that? Well, why would you put it in here? If you're not going to give the minister that type of power, then why would you do that? That would be, any self-regulated profession that would agree to that. To me, this is the writing on the wall to say that, guess what? You don't have the ability to regulate yourselves, and therefore you should just trust the government to look after you. Don't worry yourself over that. The government will be more than happy to take care of your every want and need, which is exactly what we hear from this NDP Liberal Costly Coalition every single day, who say, oh, don't worry, we're going to build more houses. We'll just invest some money. What happens? They build fewer houses. We're going to, oh, this is the classic for me. Don't worry. In our platform in 2021, the Costly Coalition said, we're going to invest $4.5 billion in the Canada Mental Health Transfer. How does that going for you? How many dollars have been invested in mental health through the Canada Mental Health Transfer? And it's a very simple answer, because the answer is zero. Zero. So they are very, very good at making lots of announcements and taking lots of pictures and saying, look at what we are going to do for you. And you know what they end up doing? Making things worse. It's worse than nothing. It's making things worse. How can you possibly know there's a housing crisis that, again, is not the responsibility of the federal government, but then to go on and say, we're going to spend billions of dollars and build more houses, and they've built less. It's nonsensical. It's beyond belief. And so for our colleague from the NDP, part of the Costly Coalition, to suggest that this is a filibuster, this is a serious and significant defense of Canadian principles that somebody has to say, because Mr. Julian would simply love for us just to go on and say, just pass it. Just go ahead. No problem. We don't need any debate. We don't need any witnesses. We know that the Costly Coalition knows best. And again, that overriding and overarching principle is exactly what underscores my fear around Part C of this paragraph, suggesting that the autonomy for Canada's frontline healthcare providers is going to be interfered with by a federal government, which I think is the absolute travesty. It's interesting. my colleagues talked about patience in here. This is going to be about the primacy of patience. And, you know, there's nothing in here that says, it does mention the well-being of Canadians, but it doesn't mention that there's going to be a patient ombudsman or an ombudsperson. It doesn't mention that the primacy of patients being part of the decision-making is in there. None of that wording, which we also heard testimony about, significant testimony suggesting that there should be an ombud related to patient affairs, and patients should be part of the decision-making and the going forward. So not only did this bill not use Canada's two leading experts in pharmacare, both of whom had the ability to testify but were not asked to have input on the bill before it was created, they didn't ask any patients to be a part of it either. And certainly that cry has been going out for a very, very long time, and there's no mention of a patient ombud here to allow patients to be part of that decision making. So do I trust this government? No. Do I have a distrust of most governments? Not in the sense that I don't believe they have some good things in their mind or the good intentions, but do I trust in their ability to act on them and make them reality? And the answer there, of course, is a resounding no, because we see that through the examples that I've been able to provide here. So for that reason, I would implore my colleagues to support this on behalf of Canada's excellent and highly trained healthcare practitioners that exist in the system now. Thank you, Chair.
Speakers list is now exhausted. Are there any further interventions with respect to CPC 12? Mr. Doherty? Mr. Doherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to have the floor after having to sit for almost 4 hours listening to our NDP colleague filibuster every one of the CPC amendments. He likes to point fingers and say that the CPC are filibustering, but in reality is we're the only party that put forth any amendments for this bill. I will challenge Canadians that whenever a bill comes forward, it is the opposition's job to review pieces of legislation, and as the government always says, is let's not let perfection get in the way of progress. And they say, just trust us. Let's get it to committee, and we will work with all parties to make this bill better. Well, the Conservatives rolled up their sleeves, and if you've been listening in for the last 4 hours, you will see that Canadians will see that we have put forth some common sense amendments, nonpartisan amendments that would make this bill more clear and concise, and tell Canadians exactly what Bill C-64 is. Unfortunately, after every discussion regarding the CPC amendments, our colleague from the NDP wants to filibuster and goes on and on and on, and then blames it on Conservatives for filibustering for 4 hours. I would assume, well, pardon me, I won't say assume, never want to assume anything, but I would bet, Mr. Chair, that our colleague from the NDP will probably raise his hand and want to filibuster my intervention for the remaining minutes of this committee meeting. You know what's sad is that the NDP had an opportunity with their coalition to really make something that would be beneficial for so many Canadians. Instead, they kind of bowed down to their Liberal colleagues in the coalition, and they indeed are helping. They're desperate to try and keep the Prime Minister in power, and instead of fighting for actual Canadians and a true pharmacare program, and indeed the constituent that Mr. Julian raises with his cardiac issues, or my constituent, former constituents that have that succumbed to a terrible disease, ALS, or any of the other millions of Canadians that are struggling because of lack of access to a pharmacare program or access to affordable drugs. They didn't. They settled on contraception and diabetes, ultimately left with a two-bill drug that really doesn't include any other Canadians that are two-drug bills, sorry, thank you. So he is listening, so that's good. Thank you, Mr. Julian, for that. He's taking notes because he's going to filibuster the rest of the remaining minutes. Trust me. I'd be surprised if he didn't. He's laughing down the way. You know, and you know, it's been hard sitting here, Mr. Chair, and to my colleagues, listening for him to go on for, well, it would be 4 hours at this point right now. And no doubt he'll go on for 4 hours and more minutes after I'm done after this. You know, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, all Conservatives wanted to do with the 43 amendments that we worked tirelessly on in good faith, with also the witnesses that were unable to come to this committee because and we're not allowed to be heard, is to put forth a piece of legislation, amendments that would make this legislation better, one that would truly represent the intent of this piece of legislation. You know, we've heard testimony from constituents all along the way talking about the concerns that they have. You've heard testimony from insurers that have some very real concerns as to what's going to happen with the existing plans and coverage that so many Canadians have. You know, what will be covered in this pharmacare? We heard with Mr. Julian's filibuster earlier that this is just a phase one, that phase two is coming. Just wait, and the check's in the mail. So Canadians will have yet to wait a little bit longer for that. Remains to be seen what that will be. Perhaps at that time, those drugs for cardiac patients, or maybe a rare disease strategy, or access to those medications that so many Canadians are unable to receive or afford, and have to go to other jurisdictions to get the coverage and treatment. You know, it's I mentioned it earlier, we do have 3 physicians on this committee that I deeply respect in terms of their points of view. Sadly, we've heard some from Mr. Hanley. Dr. Pavlovsky is, and again, I struggle with his last name, Marcus, I'll say Marcus. He is not speaking up tonight, which I always appreciate his voice of reason at times. Today he's sadly a little bit quiet. So, Mr. Chair, I see that it is about 5 minutes after 8 or thereabouts. I will cede the floor to my colleague. I don't know whether I saw his hand come up or not from the NDP. Mr. Julian would like to filibuster the remaining 27 minutes. He's not making eye contact with me, but I know that he's probably cooking something up right now with his coalition partners. So with that, I'll cede the floor.
That exhausts the speakers list. Are we ready for the question? The question is, shall CPC 12 carry? A recorded division has been requested on CPC 12.
On CPC 12, Dr. Hanley.
Nay.
Madame Kayabaga. Mr. Naqvi?
No.
Dr. Pulowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
No.
Mr. Doherty. Dr. Ellis.
En faveur.
Ms. Goodridge.
En faveur.
Dr. Kitchen.
Oui.
Monsieur Blanchette-Joca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No to the filibuster. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 12 is therefore defeated. That brings us to CPC 13. In the name of Dr. Ellis, would you like to move CPC 13, Dr. Ellis?
Avec plaisir, Monsieur le Président.
With pleasure, Mr. Chair.
So here, once again, what we see is the original clause stating provide universal coverage of pharmaceutical products across Canada. It's an aspirational goal. It's just not the truth. And I think we've heard this resounding over and over and over again in the reasoned arguments which we have presented, that Bill C-64 and Clause 4 will be amended by replacing line 30 on page 3 with the following, quote, D, make progress on providing universal coverage of pharmaceutical products across Canada. So, you know, Chair, I think it important, again, that this is about having Canadians understand that transparency and sunny ways are something that at the current time, very, very sadly on behalf of Canadians, do not exist with this NDP Liberal coalition government. And what we are seeing is a lack of transparency. They are spending money, you know, at risk of insulting drunken sailors. To say that they are spending money on, quote unquote, on behalf of Canadians, which realistically is in line with the problems that they have already created. You know, some of the things that we've heard are the number of people who are living in food insecurity because of the spending of this NDP Liberal costly coalition. You know, and then what do they say? And so the statistic is that 26% of Canadians are going without food, mostly parents, so that their children can eat. They're skipping meals, going to food banks, etc. They have food insecurity so that their children can eat. And what do we see now? We see the government that created this problem is going to swoop in and save Canadian children by creating a national school food program. Well, you know, let's be honest. If they didn't create the problem in the first place so that Canadians couldn't afford to feed themselves, they wouldn't have to create a national school food program. This is like, you know, if I have a prosthetic business and I remove one of Mr. Doherty's legs and then I sell him a prosthesis. You know, it's not a funny analogy. It's something that's shared between Mr. Doherty and I apologize for being rather graphic. But it just makes no sense. It's like I ram into his car and I have a car business and I sell him a new one. I mean, this is me creating a problem for him, and you know, then selling him the solution. Which, wow, for Canadians who are no longer ready to be fleeced by the costly coalition, then they know what lies at the heart of the spending addiction that this government has. You know, the cost of mortgages has doubled, the cost of rent has doubled, the number of homeless encampments is beyond imagination. You know, it's always interesting to be in the House of Commons and listening to question period without answer. And, you know, folks say, well, you know, back when Pierre Poilievre was the Minister of Housing, how many houses did he build? Well, he didn't have to build houses because there wasn't a housing crisis. The federal government didn't have to step in, or didn't have to try to step in, as they have tried now and failed miserably by building fewer houses and spending more money. The system, the economy of the country worked in the way that it is imagined to work, such that people who are house builders, they build houses. The permits were granted by municipal governments. And Canadians had money in their pocket, which allowed them to afford to pay their mortgage. Interest rates were not out of control, rising the most rapidly that they have in the last 40 years. So when we begin to look at the economic situation that has been created by this costly coalition, and then to have the audacity to say that we will step in and we shall solve your problems, even though it's a problem that they have created. You can't afford your medications, and what we heard some of the testimony talking about was Canadians are choosing between eating and paying for their medications. Well, if the cost of food wasn't so high, then they could pay for their medications. If the leader of the NDP's brother were not a lobbyist for Metro, then maybe the cost of food would be less. If we didn't have a carbon tax, the dreaded tax on everything, and I know that Canadians have heard this before, but it bears repeating. If you tax the farmer that grows the food and the trucker that ships the food, then the people like all of us who buy the food are going to have to pay more. And so as we see that cascading effect, then we know that that is where the problem lies. It's the spending addiction. It's the $10 a day daycare program, again, that can't be delivered. We know that there are not spots out there for Canadian working families where both people have to work because of the costly coalition and the cost of everything, that they are unable to find a daycare spot for $10 a day. And again, they have I can't even explain it, they have the anti-Midas touch. It's not that things turn to gold, it's that things turn to something else in a very different color when they touch them, which again doesn't allow people to have appropriate access to the things that they need in this country. So to suggest that allowing the costly coalition to create another costly program for two medications, two conditions in this country would be a significant jeopardy. And to go on and again suggest that this is more than what it is, which is what line 30 is suggesting, providing universal coverage of pharmaceutical products. This is not doing any such thing. I know that every other time that we have brought this up, pointing out that all of the testimony was directed exactly towards contraceptive pills and devices and diabetic medications and devices, we know that this costly coalition today has voted it down because they do not want Canadians to know that what they are attempting to create here is very limited in scope and does not fulfill the needs of all Canadians. Further to that, I'll say it again, this does not mean that Conservatives are against medications or against contraceptions or against the good health of Canadians. That is not what this means. What it means is that the way they are going about it without transparency, without accountability, and with the background of spending money foolishly on things like consultants. We're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars being spent there, which could be spent elsewhere. I outlined clearly previously the money that was wasted on the Medicago fiasco, $500 million, and now the Novavax fiasco, another $130 million with a recurring cost of $17 million to Canadians without anything at all to show for it. Nothing. And, you know, you think this is, it's not their money they're spending, it's our money. This is our money, and what we're asking for is accountability and transparency and telling the truth and pointing out what is happening is not the way they're portraying it. This is about contraceptives and diabetes medications. That's what this is about. This is not a universal pharmacare program where it doesn't matter where you go. You probably won't even have to show a card if everything's free. You just have to have your prescription. Boom, everything's free. And nothing is free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. This is coming out of the pockets of every Canadian. And when you begin to look at that with the amount of debt and the debt servicing costs that are happening now in this country, that the debt servicing costs are more than $1 billion with a B, $1 billion every single week, every week, which sadly we know is more than the Canada Health transfer. It is more than that because this Prime Minister of the costly coalition believed that interest rates would never go up, and of course, the infamous quote, "the budgets balance themselves." And we know that this costly coalition continues to have an ongoing deficit spending position, which was never the expectation of any government in the history of the free world. That's not their expectation. And folks out there listening, think of it from your own perspective. If you're making $500 a week and you're spending $600 a week every single week, then it becomes very, very difficult.
Starting to fail to see the relevance of the top of the charts, the top best slogan lines and the talking points of my colleagues across the way through the CPC that are being recited at this moment as it relates to CPC 13. So I'm sure, Chair, you'll remind Mr. Ellis to find some sort of relevance to the amendment that has been presented as he goes on and on about things that, it's their usual talking points. Thank you.
As I follow the argument, the amendment is about providing universal coverage of pharmaceuticals, which is an expenditure, and he's talking about expenditures. So I don't.
Everything has expenditure.
I don't see it as being far from the amendment at all. With respect, Mr. Naqvi, go ahead, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you very much, Chair. And there's a very old saying, Chair, that the truth hurts. And when we understand on behalf of Canadians that the costly coalition wishes to spend more money than they take in, then we also know that there are going to be ways that they are going to raise taxes. The carbon tax is the biggest tax grab. We hear now that as relevant as it is to this particular bill, that they want to increase capital gains on professionals, including physicians, of which we have a lack of physicians in this country. Some estimates would suggest that there's approximately 30,000 family doctors short in this country. And so then when you begin to do the math and look at the capital gains tax increase, which they wish to do, it's a 6% tax grab. And the audacity is that people will say, well, 6% is not that much, but it is considering the fact that physicians who are either retired or are close to retirement, that this is going to be something that they will have to pay out of the savings that they have calculated that they would need to fund their own retirement. So as we begin to consider that, and we hear the statements now coming out of the Canadian Medical Association to suggest again that the fiscal practices and policies of this government are incredibly inappropriate and short-sighted, that yes, the truth can be hurtful to the costly coalition to understand that this year that they will run another deficit of approximately $60 billion. In perpetuity, we don't see an end to this. And when you look at the debt clock for Canadians, you can look that up on the internet if you want to understand on behalf of every single person in Canada how much is owed on behalf of yourselves because of allowing the costly coalition free rein and the ability to decide how to spend money in a manner which is not responsible. And, whether, my colleague opposite wishes to hear these points repeated or not, you know what, I think that if you hear them over and over again, then maybe at some point they'll sink in. And the next time that he's sitting around with his caucus mates, maybe through you, Chair, he'll have that opinion to say, wow, hey, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't spend $2 billion more dollars. But, now $1 billion here, $1 billion there, it's not much money to think about. But I hope that maybe that he will hear my voice resonating in his head, saying that there you go, that I shouldn't probably vote for spending this money. But, I don't hold out a whole lot of hope for that through you, Chair. So the point of a CPC 13 amendment is really related, again, to provide clarity to Canadians that this is about progress on providing universal coverage of pharmaceutical products. This is not a pharmacare bill. It is a pharmacare pamphlet of 4 pages. And once again, as we heard through testimony from multiple witnesses, and I would suggest that what we are seeing here is that the Costly Coalition wants to disregard or disrepute the testimony of many of the witnesses that we heard, that this is purely about contraceptives and diabetes. That is what this is about. It's not about other medications. There's no other mention. There was no other witness testimony related to it, not to mention the fact that there was really no witness testimony related to an expert helping to create this bill, which is why it's such a disaster. So at that point, Chair, I'm happy to cede the floor and hear what others may have to say. Thank you.
Ms. Sidhu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to remind colleagues about the testimony of a patient, Mr. Blasky, last week. He told us that the universal coverage that includes diabetes medication is simply life-saving. No one can deny that. We have 3 docs in this committee. No one denies that untreated diabetes cost, millions of dollars and the serious consequences. So with that said, Mr. Chair, I want to make a comment on this amendment. This provisions talks about the principle in addition to the Canada Health Act. The first 3 principles refer to the accessibility, affordability, and the appropriate use of pharmaceutical products. These are the goals and the principle, not descriptions. Removing the word provide weakens the principle, and so that, Mr. Chair, I oppose this amendment.
Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 4.5 hours, coming up to 4 3/4 hours for 3 amendments in the Conservative filibuster. But I do need to respond on the drunken sailors component, because to compare Conservative governments to drunken sailors does a disservice to drunken sailors, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, Chair. I think, point of order, if you check the record, Chair, that's exactly what I already said. So not that funny.
Go ahead, Mr. Julian. I didn't hear a point of order there.
So the Conservatives, when they were in power, put in place the infamous Harper tax haven treaties, which the PBO tells us costs over $30 billion each and every year. Now, I think, Mr. Chair, you and I would probably agree, Liberals should have ended those practices. They've kept them, which has led to a tremendous fiscal problem that is still not resolved. But the Conservatives, when they were in power, gave $116 billion in liquidity supports to Canada's big banks. They doled out billions of dollars every year to oil and gas CEOs. That amount over that dismal decade of the Harper government was about $100 billion. So in short, Conservatives themselves are responsible for about half the structural deficit that we have in our country. And so for Conservatives to ever talk about fiscal management there's only one way to put it. Conservative fiscal management is an oxymoron. They are terrible at managing money, absolutely terrible, because they throw money at lobbyists, they throw money at the corporate CEOs, they don't throw money at people. And this is why I'm opposing CPC 13, because what are they proposing here? They're proposing to move from what says in the bill, what is very clearly stated in the bill, that the purpose, the principle is to provide universal coverage of pharmaceutical products across Canada. And instead, they put in the weasel words, make progress instead on providing universal coverage of pharmaceutical products. They have no hesitation about massive, massive subsidies, the corporate sector to corporate lobbyists. When it comes to people who are struggling, like Amber, my constituent, paying $1,000 every month for her diabetes medication, Conservatives say, whoa, no, we can't afford that. We can't afford the things that actually benefit people. So this is a ridiculous amendment. It shouldn't have been tabled, but I understand the Conservatives just want to block this bill. Fortunately, with the House motion, within the next half hour, we will actually move to consider these amendments the Conservatives have been blocking for the last 5 hours, and we'll be able to get this bill through this committee. But I find it passing strange that Conservatives don't even understand their own lamentable history when it comes to managing money, paying down debt. And if they want to inform themselves, I would suggest through you, Mr. Chair, to Conservative members of the committee, fiscal period returns that are issued by the annually by the Ministry of Finance actually shows which governments are best at managing money and paying down debt. And over the last 40 years, it has been every single year NDP governments at the provincial level that have been the best. If you look at the fiscal period returns, you'll see that compared to Conservative governments, in Liberal governments, the NDP is best at managing money. And there's just a simple reason why that is so, Mr. Chair, and that's because NDP governments put people first. We would put pharmacare before we would put massive bailouts to the banks. We put in place dental care rather than the oil and gas CEOs, the splurging that we saw under the Conservatives. And rather than putting in place a structural deficit of $30 billion a year through the infamous Harper tax haven treaties, we believe that money actually needs to go to people to make sure that they have an adequate income, affordable housing, all those things that most Canadians agree should be the priority of any government. So I take absolutely no lessons from Conservatives. They are horrible at managing money, and their track record shows that.
Mr. Doherty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, over 5 hours we've had to listen to the multiple interventions, the filibustering of our NDP colleague there. If you believe this, our colleague across the way or down the way, I mean, he's got the medication to make everything better. The NDP are the saving grace for our country, apparently, is what Mr. Julian is saying, which I have to disagree with vehemently. It's interesting. We're debating CPC 13, and the line is make progress on providing universal coverage of pharmaceuticals. I believe we're probably the only party that's talking about providing universal coverage of pharmaceuticals, because Bill C-64, as we have talked about tonight, is really truly only about providing access to contraception and as well as medication for those struggling with or living with diabetes. It is a common sense amendment, one of 43 that sadly we only got to CPC 13 because of the interventions and the filibustering of our NDP colleague down the way, who every chance he got made sure, but he could not put any amendments forth to try and make this bill any better. Which is deeply disappointing. I know him to be a decent man, but he sure likes to hear himself talk, and I hope Canadians were paying attention to that. There's no doubt he will probably try to get a little bit extra time in after I cede the floor, Mr. Chair, and I'm imploring you to please, we've had enough of his interventions. Because he is over 5 hours we've had to listen to him, and it's deeply disappointing because we could have got to more of the CPC amendments. Over 43. I want it on the record that Conservatives rolled up their sleeves and got to work on this, where our NDP colleagues and our Liberal colleagues, they said no, they're not going to do it, and all we've heard is just rhetoric from our colleague down the way, who has tried to block any of the common sense amendments that the CPC in good faith put forth, because they told Canadians in the House during debate that just to trust them, and that they would get this bill. Let's let Conservatives and the House pass this bill to get it to committee, and we will do good work. Well, there was one party that came to work tonight, and that was, the Bloc, I'm sorry, two parties that came to work. I stand corrected by my good colleague, Ms. Goodrich. Sadly, our colleague down the way from the NDP wasted over 5.5 hours of time on this, Mr. Chair. And
Point of order. Point of order for Mr. Naqvi.
I find this so shameful. Both the Conservatives and the NDP thinking this is some funny game, going on and on, back and forth as to who's filibustering, while preventing us from doing important work. You know what? Better spend my time would have been with my children right now, putting them bed, as opposed to I'm here listening to them being foolish, as opposed to working on a very important piece of legislation that will help thousands, hundreds of thousands of Canadians, millions of Canadians. That's shameful.
Thank you, Mr.
Point of order.
Naqvi. Point of order from Ms. Goodrich.
That was very clearly not a point of order. I understand that Mr. Naqvi doesn't like to listen to the truth, but
and neither is what you're saying. But gladly, it is now 8:30, and I shall now interrupt the proceedings and go first to thank our witnesses for being with us today. You are welcome to stay, but you are free to leave. And we very much appreciate you being with us, and hope that the rest of your week goes as well as Monday evening has. Thanks again. It being 8:30, pursuant to the order adopted by the House on Wednesday, May 22nd, I have now interrupted the proceedings. Please note that all remaining amendments submitted to the committee are now deemed moved. I will now put the question forthwith and successively without further debate on all remaining clauses and amendments submitted to the committee, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. CPC 13. Shall CPC 13 carry?
Excuse me, Chair. If you really want to get through these things quickly, it's quite clear that nobody's going to vote for the CPC amendments. We're happy to vote for all of them, and they can vote against them, but I'd like that recorded. It's a bit unusual, I agree, but happy to do that.
So, are you asking for a recorded division, or are you asking that they be negatived on division?
What I would suggest, Chair, is something in between that. I know it's probably not in line with the rules, but what I would suggest.
I can do it by a show of hands.
Can you just wait till I'm done talking? Man. So my suggestion is go ahead.
Go ahead. Do you have a
Thank
point
you.
of order?
I was going to wait for. Yeah, I was going to say. I know Mr. Ellis is down on his own amendments, but there may be a amendment of Mr. Ellis that we support. So.
I'm not down on them. I'm happy to vote. I'm going to vote for all of them. But you're going to vote against them.
Well, you know, we give due consideration to all the amendments, and there's one worthy that we may support.
Okay. Well, don't say I didn't offer you children to have you put them to bed.
I think Mr. Julian wants in on the point of order.
Just very clearly, the motion of instruction gives you the authority to move through each of the amendments. I don't think it will take very long.
Right. CPC 13, shall it carry?
Request a recorded division, please, Chair.
On CPC 13, Dr. Hanley.
No.
Madame Kaya-Bega. Mr. Naqvi.
No.
Dr. Belowski.
Oppose.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against?
Mr. Doherty.
Or.
Dr. Ellis.
Or.
Ms. Goodrich.
in favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
In favor.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 13 is defeated. That brings us to CPC 14. So shall CPC 14 carry?
Requested recorded division, Chair.
Recorded division, please, Madam Clerk.
C14, Dr. Hanley.
Against.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
4.
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
4.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Pour.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
That's, count, 2, 4, 6, 6 nays, 5 yeas.
Excuse me, Chair. With unanimous consent, I will withdraw 15 and 16.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll get to it in a minute, but I appreciate that. Hold that thought. CPC 14 is therefore defeated. Brings us to Clause 4. Shall Clause 4 carry? Carried on division? Carried on division. Dr. Ellis wishes to withdraw CPC 15 and CPC 16. Do we have unanimous consent for CPC 15 to be withdrawn? I see unanimous consent. Do we have unanimous consent for CPC 16 to be
No.
withdrawn?
No.
CPC 16 is not withdrawn, and therefore the question is, shall CPC 16 carry? Would we like a show of hands on CPC 16? All those in favor of CPC 16, hands up. All those opposed? CPC 16 is defeated. CPC 17, shall CPC 17 carry?
Request a recorded division, please, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 17, please, Madam Clerk.
CPC 17, Dr. Hanley.
Oppose.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
4.
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Ms. Goodridge.
En faveur.
Dr. Kitchen.
4.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 17 is therefore defeated. Shall Clause 5 carry? Carried on division. New Clause 5.1. So that is the subject of CPC 18. Shall CPC 18 carry?
Request a recorded division, please, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 18, please, Madam Clerk.
CPC 18, Dr. Hanley.
Contre.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
4.
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
4.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 19, CPC 18 is defeated, brings us to CPC 19. Shall CPC 19 carry? Recorded division on CPC 19.
CPC 19, Dr. Hanley.
Yes.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
Oui.
Dr. Pulowski.
Yes.
Ms. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty. Yes. Dr. Ellis.
Yes.
Ms. Goodridge.
Yes, and go Oilers, go.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Ms. Blanchette-Jonca.
Oh.
Mr. Julian.
Yes, it's unanimous.
It is unanimous. 11 yeas.
CPC 19 is therefore carried. Brings us to CPC 20. Bill C-64, an act respecting pharmacare, authorizes the Minister of Health to make payments to a province or territory if an agreement has been entered into with that province or territory in order to increase any existing public pharmacare coverage. The amendment seeks to broaden those payments to provide Canadians with public pharmacare coverage, which would have the effect of extending payments to a new group of Canadians not already covered by the Royal Recommendation. As a House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 772, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the Royal Recommendation. In the opinion of the Chair, the amendment proposes a new scheme, which would impose a charge on the public treasury. I therefore rule this amendment inadmissible. Which then brings us to CPC 21. And this is going to sound familiar to you. Bill C-64, an act respecting pharmacare, authorizes the Minister of Health to make payments to a province or territory if an agreement has been entered into with that province or territory. The amendment provides for payments from the Minister to the province or territory, even if no agreement has been entered into, as a House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 772, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the Royal Recommendation. In the opinion of the Chair, the amendment seeks to alter the terms and conditions of the Royal Recommendation and could impose a new charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible. And that brings us to CPC 22. So the question for the committee is, shall CPC 22 carry?
Yeah,
Recorded division on CPC 22, please.
Yes, sir. CPC 22, Dr. Headley.
Oppose.
Madame Kayabega.
I have to rule
Mr.
that out of
Nakvi.
order first.
Against.
Dr. Pulowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty. Dr. Ellis.
Or
Ms. Goodridge.
Or
Dr. Kitchen.
For.
Mr. Blanchette-Jonca.
Oh.
Mr. Julian.
No, contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 22 is therefore defeated. Le prochain amendement, c'est BQ.
The next amendment is BQ1. Bill C-64, an act respecting pharmacare, authorizes the Minister of Health to make payments to a province or territory if an agreement has been entered into with that province or territory. The amendment provides for payments from the Minister to the province or territory, even if no agreement has been entered into. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 772, and I quote, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment seeks to alter the terms and conditions of the royal recommendation and could impose a new charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible. Mr. Chair, I would like to challenge your decision. The chair's decision has been contested. A question for you. Will we keep the chair's decision in English?
Chair be sustained. We'll have a recorded division on that, I presume. Madam Clerk?
The question is, shall the chair's decision be sustained? Dr. Hanley.
Oui.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
We.
Dr. Pulowski.
Yes.
Ms. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty. No. Dr. Ellis.
No.
Ms. Goodridge.
No.
Dr. Kitchen.
No.
Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca.
No.
Mr. Julian. 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Ruling of the chair is therefore sustained. That brings us to Clause 6. Clause 6 has been amended by the unanimous vote on CPC 19. So the question is whether Clause 6 as amended, shall Clause 6 as amended carry? Carried on division. Okay. Next, we are at Clause 7. Okay. Since NDP 1 was moved, CPC 23 cannot be voted on as they are identical. So we are now at NDP 1. Shall NDP 1 carry? Do we have consent? Do we have unanimous support for NDP 1? NDP 1 is therefore carried. If NDP 1 is moved, CPC 23 cannot be. And then that takes us to CPC 24. Shall CPC 24 carry?
Request a recorded division, please, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 24, please.
CPC 24, Dr. Hanley.
No.
Madame Kayabega.
No.
Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pulowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
No.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Dr. Ellis.
Yes.
Ms. Goodridge.
Yes.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca.
Oh.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 24 is therefore defeated. That brings us to Clause 7 as amended. Shall Clause 7 as amended carry? Carried on division. That brings us to Clause 8 and CPC 25. Shall CPC 25 carry?
Request a recorded vote, please,
Recorded
Chair.
division on CPC 25, please.
On CPC 25?
Right.
Yes, sir. Dr. Hanley.
Against.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
Against.
Dr. Pulowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty. Thank you, sir. Dr. Ellis.
For.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
For.
Monsieur Blanchette-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian. 7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 25 is therefore defeated, brings us to CPC 26. If CPC 26 is adopted, CPC 27 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. As a House of Commons procedure and practice, 3rd edition states on page 769, amendments must be proposed following the order of the text to be amended. Once a line of a clause has been amended by the committee, it cannot be further amended by a subsequent amendment, as a given line may be amended only once. So the question for the committee is, shall CPC 26 carry?
Request for recorded division.
Recorded division on CPC 26, please.
Sir Dr. Henley.
No.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pulowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
No.
Mr. Doherty. Dr. Ellis.
Yes.
Ms. Goodridge. En faveur.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Ms. Blanchette-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
Chair requests to unanimous consent to withdraw 27.
CPC 26 is defeated. We have a request for unanimous consent to withdraw CPC 27. We have unanimous consent to withdraw CPC 27. I see unanimous consent. Brings us to CPC 28. Shall CPC 28 carry?
Request division.
Recorded division on CPC 28, please.
CBC 28, Dr. Henley.
Oppose. Sorry.
Madame Kayabega.
Contre.
Mr. Nakvi.
Against.
Dr. Pulowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
For.
Dr. Ellis.
For.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Ms. Blanchette-Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 28 is defeated. Shall Clause 8 carry? Carried on division. Brings us to Clause 9 and CPC 29. Shall CPC 29 carry?
Request for recorded division, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 29, please. Yes.
On CPC 29, Dr. Hanley.
Contre.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pulowski.
Against.
I'm sorry, Dr. Pulowski.
Against.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty. Dr. Ellis. Ms. Goodridge.
For.
Dr. Kitchen.
For.
Ms. Blanchette-Jonca.
For.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 29 is therefore defeated. Brings us to CPC 30. Shall CPC 30 carry?
Request for recorded division.
Recorded division on CPC 30, please.
CPC 30, Dr. Hanley.
No.
Madame Kayabega. No. Mr. Nakvi.
No.
Dr. Pulowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty. Dr. Ellis.
For.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
For.
Mr. Julian?
No, contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 30 is defeated. Shall Clause 9 carry? Carried on division. Brings us to Clause 10. CPC 31. Shall CPC 31 carry?
Request recorded division.
Recorded division, please.
CPC 31, Dr. Hanley. Dr. Hanley?
No. No.
Madame Kayabega?
Contre.
Mr. Nakvi?
No.
Dr. Pawlowski?
No.
Ms. Sidhu?
Against.
Mr. Doherty?
For.
Dr. Ellis?
For.
Ms. Goodrich?
En faveur.
Dr. Kitchen?
For.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
Contre.
Mr. Julian?
No, contre.
Contre. So 7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 31 is therefore defeated. Shall Clause 10 carry? Carried on division. Brings us to CPC 32. Shall CPC 32 carry?
Recorded division.
Recorded division on CPC 32.
CPC 32. Dr. Hanley?
No.
Madame Kayabega? Mr. Nakvi?
No.
Dr. Pawlowski?
No.
Ms. Sidhu?
Against.
Mr. Doherty? Dr. Ellis?
For.
Ms. Goodrich?
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen?
For.
Breathing from Mr. Hanley's weird.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
For.
Mr. Julian?
No, contre.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 32 is therefore defeated. Brings us to Clause 11 and CPC 33. Shall CPC 33 carry?
Recorded division, sir.
On CPC 33, please.
On CPC 33, Dr. Hanley?
Against.
Madame Kayabega?
Contre.
Mr. Nakvi?
No.
Dr. Pawlowski?
No.
Ms. Sidhu?
Against.
Mr. Doherty?
For.
Dr. Ellis?
For.
Ms. Goodrich?
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen?
For.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
Contre.
Mr. Julian?
No, contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 33 is defeated. That brings us to NDP 2. Shall NDP 2 carry? Okay, I believe we have, yes, okay, NDP 2 is therefore adopted. So that brings us to Clause 11 as amended by NDP 2. Shall Clause 11 as amended carry? On division. Thank you. Brings us to Clause 12. Shall CPC 34 carry?
Recorded division, please.
Recorded division on CPC 34, please.
CPC 34, Dr. Hanley?
Oppose.
Madame Kayabega?
Contre.
Mr. Nakvi?
No.
Dr. Pawlowski?
No.
Ms. Sidhu?
No.
Mr. Doherty?
For.
Dr. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Goodrich?
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen?
Yes.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca?
Contre.
Mr. Julian?
No, contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 34 is therefore defeated.
Excuse me, Chair, would like unanimous consent to withdraw 35, please.
Mr.
And 36, sorry.
Okay, Dr. Ellis, hold that thought,
apologize.
because I'm going to go back now to the definition section that we had agreed to postpone, and then we'll come back to the preamble. So, as members had earlier agreed to postpone Clause 2, the committee will now consider Clause 2 and its proposed amendments, which can be found on pages 1 to 6 of the package of amendments. So we're now considering Clause 2, and we're at CPC 1. Shall CPC 1 carry?
Recorded division.
Recorded division on CPC 1. Please.
CPC 1, Dr. Hanley.
No.
Madame Kayabega.
Contre.
Mr. Naqvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
4.
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
None of these.
Ms. Blanchette Jonca.
Bull.
Okay.
Mr. Julian.
No.
I'm
Contre.
ruling it out of order. Okay.
6 nays, 5 yeas.
CPC 1 is therefore defeated. That brings us to CPC 2. This amendment seeks to make a substantive modification to the definitions clause by adding a definition of Indigenous governing body, a term that is not used.
Excuse me, Chair, request unanimous consent to withdraw.
We have unanimous consent to withdraw CPC 2. I see unanimous consent. It is therefore withdrawn. Brings us to CPC 3. If CPC 3 is adopted, CPC 4 can't be moved because they both define the term National Bulk Purchasing Strategy. So the question for the committee is whether CPC 3 shall carry. A recorded division?
Please, Chair.
On CPC 3, please.
CPC 3, Dr. Henley.
Against.
Sorry.
Madame
Should I
Kayabega.
be on 2?
Mr. Naqvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
Or-
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Mr. Good. Madame Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
4.
Ms. Blanchette Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 3 is defeated, brings us to CPC 4. Shall CPC 4 carry?
I'm sorry, Chair, there appears to be a bit of confusion. We didn't want CPC 4 in there, so we'll request unanimous consent to withdraw.
We have unanimous consent to withdraw CPC 4. We do. Thank you. It's withdrawn. CPC 5. Shall CPC 5 carry?
Recorded division, please, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 5, please.
CPC 5, Dr. Hanley.
Against.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Naqvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty.
4.
Dr. Ellis.
4.
Ms. Goodridge.
En faveur.
Dr. Kitchen.
Yes.
Ms. Blanchette Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
No. Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 5 is therefore defeated, brings us to CPC 6. Shall CPC 6 carry?
Recorded division, please, Chair.
Recorded division on CPC 6, please.
CPC 6, Dr. Hanley.
Against.
Madame Kayabega. Mr. Naqvi.
No.
Dr. Pawlowski.
No.
Ms. Sidhu.
Against.
Mr. Doherty, 4. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Ellis.
In favor.
Ms. Goodridge.
In favor.
Dr. Kitchen.
4.
Ms. Blanchette Jonca.
Contre.
Mr. Julian.
Contre.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
CPC 6 is defeated. Shall Clause 2 carry? Carried on division. That brings us then to the preamble.